Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of The Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I am WRAL State Government Reporter Will Doran.
So this is the end of session, the taillights edition of The Wrap, and they have left a lengthy to-do list for the session, although we have to say off the top, they did get a whole lot done this week.
They did. I mean, it was a flurry down there the last few days. I mean, just dozens of bills moving back and forth between the House, Senate, all sorts of backroom deals happening to, get one thing or another over the line. Lots of bills that have, frankly, I think been held hostage as part of the budget negotiations, getting freed here.
Yeah, and things getting kludged together that did not belong together, like the
As
bill
always.
about squatters ending up with something about pet stores in it. And I mean, there are all kinds of, we'll call them strange bedfellows, but, and that's actually supposed to be not allowed under the rules. The title of the bill is supposed to reflect the bill's contents.
Yes, and there was one lawmaker, I think it was Marcia Mori from Durham, who kept trying to stop some of those things and said, you are violating the rules that we have set up for ourselves. She was pointing to, there was one bill that was about criminal law changes, and they were trying to stick in something about some sort of civil money issue. And she said, this has nothing to do with criminal law. You can't put this in a criminal law bill. And they said, well, we don't care. And they just shot that down.
There you go.
So.
Rules schmools, right? Made to be broken. Okay. So a few of the things that did get done this session, sort of the big accomplishments that I think they can point to as sort of the, the big legislation this year, probably the foster care overhaul, which got, that was the whole system reform bill that Alan Chesser and Sidney Batch worked on and shepherded. Bipartisan, had a lot of support, got a bill signing yesterday morning with Governor Stein. That's a big one.
I mean, that's been in the works for years.
Yeah. So that's a big one for sure. The cell phone restrictions in classrooms, I think, was a big one, too, because that's one of those that pretty much everybody agreed on, but they weren't sure about the details of it. So it ended up kind of a lowest common denominator, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's going to be some sort of action now basically requiring local schools, local school boards to get a little bit more serious about banning cell phones. A lot of them already do, but for those who haven't been, they're now going to be feeling the pressure to get with the times.
And I feel the need to channel our education reporter, Emily Walkenhorst, who points out a lot that many, many schools have these policies already, but they don't really enforce them because they are difficult to enforce and teachers pick their battles. So this might make them maybe a little higher priority, I guess, on the list.
I know some teachers who have said, technically my students aren't allowed to have phones in the classroom, but, every time I take their phone and send it to the principal's office, I have to deal with the angry parents. The principal doesn't always have my back. And it's just kind of, what's the point of even doing all of this fighting if it's just going to be a bigger headache for me in the end?
Right.
So.
And then there's the stuff that didn't get done. And that, wow, where do we start with that? I mean, some of the bills that we talked a lot about this year that did not come to fruition yet, at least. Senator Berger points out that the session's not over yet, but pretty well, anyway. One of them is hemp regulation, THC regulation. Both chambers, the governor, all wanted to do something to keep THC, that's the psychoactive ingredient marijuana, also to some extent in hemp, wanted to get Delta 8 as a synthetic version of it, wanted to keep that out of the hands of children. And that bill just sort of fizzled.
Yeah, they're done for probably most of the rest of the summer, but they will be coming back a little bit in the fall. So, there could be some more action on that. But yeah, that is one that, a lot of people were behind, but, kind of similar to the cell phones one, but just on a more extreme scale. They just couldn't figure out the exact details of how to word that one.
Yeah, especially when we had the Senate and the House so far apart, because the Senate had this really sort of, I don't want to say Byzantine, but we'll say complex and fully rounded regulatory structure in it. And the House one just said, you can't get it if you're under 21. And there's a lot of room there.
There's a lot in the middle, yeah.
Yeah. Another one that didn't get done that we talked about was changes to DUI laws to allow interlock. So that people who got busted for a DUI first time, didn't hurt anybody, not a super high DUI blood alcohol content, could sign up for an interlock device and maybe get a little bit of leeway when they went to court for it. That was one that seemed to have a lot of support, bipartisan support. That's another one that just didn't move. Housing issues, another really big issue that did not. We saw another bipartisan issue, all these bills across the political spectrum, House and Senate, about making sure that people can put additional accessory dwelling units, things like that, can zone up, have multiple family housing. None of those moved either.
No, HOA reform is something they've been talking about for a couple of years now. Broad bipartisan support in the House, goes nowhere in the Senate. A lot of these things are just kind of the same old story that we've been saying since, 2023, 2021, maybe longer.
And then there's the Farm Bill, which often gets tied up in negotiations, though, because that's one of those Christmas tree bills, and it gets a whole lot of deregulatory stuff in it, and it tends to provoke a lot of disagreement. The big one was raw milk, and that ended up getting pulled out of the bill by Senator Brent Jackson, who was the bill sponsor. He just said, this is just too much noise, and I don't want to kill the bill, so I'm taking it out. Did not get through. There was also a proposal earlier this session to give people a 2-year moratorium on renewing their driver's licenses. That also did not advance. And I actually talked to the folks over at DOT today to say, did y'all lobby against this? What was there? Did you lobby for it? And they said, no, not really, but it did present some problems technically, because if you tried to use your license for anything except driving in North Carolina, it would still be expired. So like car rentals,
right,
proof of identification, driving in another state. Yeah, that would be a problem. So
when they scan it at the grocery store for you to buy alcohol.
Yeah, so not the best solution. I mean, points for trying, right? In the meantime, the two big ones that they didn't get done, of course, the budget.
Yeah, just total failure on the budget. And obviously I am not there for the closed door meetings, but
I don't know that there are any.
It really seems that they just haven't even tried. They haven't even tried to get a budget this year. Is really the sense that I get from folks on both sides.
Yeah, it seems like the Senate came out saying, we want to cut taxes further. The House came out saying, we don't want to cut taxes as much as we already agreed to. They are far apart. I mean, what we heard from Senator Berger over the last couple of weeks is, there aren't even really negotiations.
Yeah.
They're not talking. And at this point in the session, the House and Senate leaders are usually talking to each other about the budget, right? And if their chairs can't get it figured out, then they kick it up to those guys, and then they send the chairs back to their corners, make some decisions, and then send them back into negotiation. It sounds like that is not happening at all.
And Speaker Destin Hall on Thursday, kind of his, final talk with reporters before they were adjourning, really started moving the goalposts on the budget and said, well, I expect to have a budget this biennium, which, for people who don't speak Latin, that means the next 2 years.
Yeah, well, we're supposed to be doing one every year. Yeah.
So, originally, obviously we're missing the July deadline. Some people thought, okay, well, maybe they'll get one done by October or something like that, and they can at least, for the raises, they can make those retroactive to July like they usually do. But now it sounds like we might just completely skip the 2025 budget year and just start new in 2026. So we'll see.
But this year, what they usually do, there are a few things that need to be adjusted every year. For example, Medicaid rebates, which accounts for changes in enrollment, school funding, which also accounts for changes in enrollment.
Right. If you have a fast-growing school, you might, even though your budget is going to continue to roll over, you might not have enough money to hire the amount of teachers that you actually need, given the reality of how many students you've got.
Right. So there are some things that are going to need to be adjusted. They usually do those in mini budgets. Even the mini budgets could not get the time of day with the other chamber this year, in either chamber.
Yeah.
So
both sides passed their own versions of mini budgets, and both sides just completely ignored the other side's ideas. So they're all just in a mood and could probably use the next month or so off.
Cooling off
cool
period.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to stop for a quick break for our sponsors here. Pay us some bills. But when we get back, we're going to tell you about the other big thing that didn't get done, and a lot of people cheering at the legislature this week. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Wrap. Laura Leslie here with Will Doran talking about the week that things did and did not get done, the end of session here at the budget. Obviously, one thing that didn't get done. The other really big thing that didn't get done, to many people's delight, was shrimp. There was a proposed bill that would ban trawling for shrimp on the Sound and the near shore waters off the coast, make the shrimpers go half a mile out. This bill had the backing of more strange bedfellows, Senate leadership, and environmentalists.
Yeah.
And also the recreational fishing folks who would like to see this, because they're convinced that one of the reasons that the fish stocks have been dwindling, they haven't been able to have a flounder season, is because so many juvenile flounder and so many other juvenile fish are being caught up in these shrimp nets.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that we are the only state, really anywhere, at least on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, that even allows shrimp boats in those inland waters where, those younger fish are spawning. So we are definitely an outlier. Seems like maybe nationwide, at least, in the eastern half of the country.
I think one of our neighbors has recently changed that and has allowed some of it. I think that was Virginia because they've started having shrimp up there. They didn't used to. Yeah, I mean, it is unusual. But then again, we have the biggest estuary except for the Chesapeake Bay, right? So, I mean, it's 80 miles long, 20 miles wide. So there's a lot of water there. So, the shrimp fishermen obviously saw this as a threat to their livelihood.
Which it certainly was,
Which it certainly could be. I mean, I didn't realize this, but a lot of fishermen are shrimpers part of the year and fishermen the rest of the year. And the shrimp is the big cash crop, right? And that's what helps to underwrite the operations for the rest of the year. So you take the cash out, you're talking about changing the possibly endangering the future of the folks who weld boats, that fix motors, that make nets, that operate the fish processing houses, all those. It's an ecosystem. It's not just the fishermen, right? So hundreds and hundreds of people, I think more than 1,000 probably on Wednesday, showed up at the legislature to make their point, circling the building, honking horns on seafood trucks, urging lawmakers in the House not to pass this after it had already gone through the Senate. Senator Bobby Hoenig did his best in the Senate as well, but he really got dissed.
He did, and he left the chamber basically in tears after this all went down. And, he was fighting to try and, stop this ban from happening and, offering amendments. And, his Republican colleagues were really kind of treating him as a Democrat, just shooting down the amendments without even doing him the courtesy of, explaining why they're shooting him down.
Or voting on them.
Or voting on them at all. He was very, very angry when they left. But then, like you said, the House comes into the picture after this all passes through the Senate.
Yeah, and Hoenig said, Hoenig and Kidwell kind of spearheaded this because they're your coastal people, right? Currituck and Carteret,
Right.
And they said that they credited it to the people who had contacted their lawmakers. Apparently, lawmakers were absolutely inundated with cell phones, emails, death threats. Yeah, there were a couple of those on social media. Somebody got arrested over that. Former auditor candidate, I think you pointed out.
Anthony Street, who came within, I think, 100,000 votes of, maybe being the state auditor, now arrested over
I would say dodged
a
a bullet, but that's too close to home, right? Anyway, moving on. We're here all week. So the House basically just said they're not moving forward with it, the House Republican caucus. And that's kind of surprising because I was chatting with some of the leaders not too long before that, and they said there was strong support in the caucus initially to go ahead and let this ban become law because there's, not everybody has a commercial fisherman in the district, but just about everybody has a recreational fisherman.
And, you mentioned the economic impact that the shrimping industry has. It is dwarfed by the recreational fishing industry.
Sure.
It's just, if you look at, kind of the impact on the broader state GDP, however you want to measure it, it is definitely a larger industry. So they do wield a little bit more muscle. But the shrimpers certainly, while they might be a little bit smaller, made their voices known.
They made their point. So we knew what happened when we heard a huge cheer erupt from the 1200 court on Thursday when the Republicans came out of caucus and announced that they were, Wednesday, when the Republicans came out of caucus and announced they were not going to take up that bill.
Yeah, between the shrimpers and the raw milk fans, there has really been, we've seen, these kind of niche agricultural issues bring to hundreds of people to the legislature. That's stuff that, the average person probably never really even thinks about. But then once it gets threatened, they are passionate and they can mobilize and get out there and make their voice heard.
I see your niche qualification there for raw milk, but I don't know about shrimping because, that's it's just sort of part of the rhythm of life at the coast. And there's generations of families that have made their livings that way, And I think a lot of people like to go down to the coast and eat that shrimp.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so that was the two big things that didn't go through. You covered a really interesting elections bill this week that popped up at the last possible minute.
Yes, and this was too late to actually go through in that flurry of several dozen bills that passed. This one didn't make it, and actually spoke with Speaker Destin Hall, and he said the version that they put out is not really ready for prime time yet. Indicating that some changes are coming. But it has some big sweeping changes in it. And this obviously comes as Republicans have kind of, forced their way into the Board of Elections, given themselves control over it. Obviously, it's for 100 plus years always been run by the governor. They have now given themselves control of the Board of Elections and are now moving to just enact large changes. Maybe the biggest would be basically allowing for a potential purge of not the entire agency, but at least all of the higher level people.
A third of it.
Yeah, a third of it, and all of the kind of top ranking, staff experts and lawyers and people like that. And by basically taking away all of the protections that they enjoy against politically motivated hiring and firing, and turning all of those top level jobs into partisan political appointee jobs. And this is something that Sam Hayes, the new elections director, has asked for. I spoke with him about this, and he said, look, just give me the chance. He said, I've only been on the job for a month. Don't prejudge this. This is not going to be a partisan thing. Yes, I am asking to remove these people's protections from hiring and firing for politically motivated reasons, but I really just want to reorganize the way that this office is done and set up, and how the staff operates, who reports to who, and the only way I can do that is by just shuffling all of the jobs around.
Didn't he also say, though, that he wanted to make sure he had people who were aligned with his vision?
He did, yes.
Yeah, that sounded kind of partisan there.
He tried to clarify that a little bit later and say that he was really talking about remote work and things like that. But I think there are a lot of skeptics out there who aren't really necessarily ready to believe that. And the bill also, for example, makes it much easier for the Board of Elections to start hiring private lawyers whenever it gets into a lawsuit. And, right now it uses just the Department of Justice. But the Department of Justice is run by Democrat Jeff Jackson. Right. And if Republicans are getting up to some shenanigans when they're changing election rules, they don't want to share the secrets of what they're trying to do or their legal strategies with the Democrats. So this bill would also basically allow for, politically connected law firms to, start billing millions of dollars to the taxpayers so that they can kind of keep things secret within the GOP on some changes that'll be coming up. And then, the bill also has a lot of just more mundane changes to how elections are going to operate, especially around absentee voting, mail-in voting, things like that.
The thing that jumped out at me about it was the potential First Amendment issue in it. Basically said that state and county election board members could not encourage people to vote.
Yes.
Or promote voting.
Yes, you could potentially see yourself removed from office if you're you're on your local state or county board of elections and you just say, "Hey everyone, it's election day, go vote." That could turn into a, impeachable offense, essentially, if this bill passes.
If it was a question of telling people to vote for someone, like legit, right?
Right, that's already banned. They already can't engage in political activity. But this is basically saying that even the minor act of saying voting is good, you should
vote.
Do it.
It's patriotic,
They're
right?
saying even that is just not something that the elections board should be engaged in.
So that means no more "I voted" stickers.
Who knows?
Maybe
not.
It's just really difficult to understand for somebody like me who spends a lot of time trying to encourage people to vote.
Well, for a long time, people have just kind of it's been the common assumption that higher turnout elections will benefit Democrats more. But here in North Carolina, we have broken records for turnout in both total numbers and percentage of people who are voting, and we keep voting for Trump. 2020 set a new record, and state voted for Trump. 2024 didn't break that record, but it came pretty close. We voted for Trump again. So, even though there has been that kind of common wisdom that higher turnout equals good for Democrats, that's not necessarily the case. But I do think that is probably where this provision is coming from. Interesting.
We're just about out of time, but I did want to mention something that happened this week. The Senate brought to a complete halt by parliamentary maneuvering by Sidney Batch and the Democrats on a bill that they did not want to vote no on and they could not vote yes on.
Yes, this was... again, like we said, so many of these bills were just changing around in this flurry of activity. And this was one that went from a bill that had completely unanimous support in the state house to basically crack down on revenge porn. And then it just turned into this litany of culture war issues when it went over to the Senate. And the Democrats threw a fit, said, "You're not serious people. Why can't we just vote on this bill that everyone agrees is good to protect children especially, who have images of them out there on the internet that they shouldn't have put out there and are now being threatened or extorted. And now we're turning this into, some partisan fight over, the definition of gender and things like that. And it led to this hours-long debate.
It was. I think it was about 3 hours. It was at least 2.
Yeah.
But what happened was they voted present. And there's nothing in the rules that says you can vote present, but there's also nothing in the rules that says you can't vote present. And so then this led to, as you can imagine, many, many clusters around the dais, of people trying to figure out what the rules actually said. You had the rules chairman over there, and Batch said that the best she could find was some law from like the 1700s that if you didn't discharge your duty as a lawmaker, you could be fined $10. And so kind of the most theatrical moment of the session, she holds up like a fistful of $10 bills to pay off all the members of her caucus who voted present instead of yes or no. It was crazy.
Yeah, well, and then the Republicans were then voting on some new rule that would say if you vote present on something connected to a bill, then you're never allowed to vote on it again in the future, which could then block the Democrats from voting on a veto override.
Yeah.
And so it just, and then the Democrats were saying you can't just stop me from voting. I'm an elected official. If I want to vote on something, I'm going to vote on it.
I have never seen. I mean, I've covered this place for 21 years now. I have never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
I've seen some crazy parliamentary stuff go down, but that was nuclear.
It seems that the Senate Democrats in particular are a little bit more in favor of scorched earth tactics this year because they're in the super minority.
Yeah, what have they got to lose?
They don't have any leverage. They might as well just go all out. The House is different, Democrats succeeded in breaking the GOP supermajority in the House, and you've seen a little bit more cordiality in the House between the two parties. But the Senate, I think just because of the political realities over there, and maybe also just some of the individual figures
and
involved at
the
top levels, is just, seems much more tense.
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting to me that yesterday, which is the final day of action in the Senate, like 7 Republicans were out.
Yeah, they're on vacation. It's almost the 4th of July.
But Berger said after session he was surprised. For example, Senator Haney didn't come back all week.
Yeah, well, as we talked about with the shrimping thing, I think he may have had his own personal reasons for not wanting to come back and deal with some of his colleagues.
And there may have been some others. I mean, I'm wondering whether the unity in that caucus, which has been so strong for so long, I'm wondering if it's starting to fracture a little, because that's unusual. I mean, it didn't change anything. They still had all the votes to do everything they wanted to do yesterday, so I should definitely point that out, but it's just unusual.
Well, and I don't know if this is related or not, but it's worth noting that the chambers also failed, in addition to all the other things they failed to agree on, even just an adjournment resolution. So they're kind of taking, a semi-unofficial break right now with, unclear plans on exactly what they'll be doing for the rest of the year. But, what Speaker Destin Hall told us was that, the Senate wanted to essentially just shut things down for the rest of the year.
And do only conference committees.
Right, only conference committees, no more actual committee work, no new bills coming up, anything like that. And,
well, that's not necessarily true, because you can shove a lot of new legislation into a conference committee.
Yeah. But, having, the ability for the public to comment on things.
Yes.
And lawmakers to actually talk in public and ask questions. And the House wanted to keep some of that, those trappings in place. And the Senate apparently just wanted to be much more closed off and just kind of shutting things down for the rest of the year. So,
yeah. Well, I guess we'll find out Monday. We're supposed to know more then about what they're planning to do for the rest of the year, maybe after everybody gets a weekend to cool off.
We'll see. Maybe it'll be Monday. Maybe it'll be August 1st. Who knows?
Hard to say. Anyway, we are out of time, but thank you for hanging in there with us on this edition of The Wrap, and we will talk to you next week.